All right, thank you so much for joining us. This is a Top Edit special training presentation on the topic of article processing charges. My name is Gareth Dyke, and we've put this training presentation together because cost for publishing academic papers is one of the most common questions that we get asked at our training workshops and by authors from around the world. So in this short presentation, we're going to talk firstly about what article processing charges are, secondly, why journals charge these fees to authors, and thirdly, we're going to give you some tips that you can apply in your own work to avoid paying article processing charges, or at least to make them lower. So let's get started and talk first of all about what article processing charges actually are and why journals charge them to authors. These costs, article processing charges, are the costs levied by journals, open access journals actually, in order to support that model for publishing. So, traditional academic journals remain free to publish as readers, as authors, as readers pick up the cost. So you have a choice, basically, as an author publishing at the moment in the current climate, to choose to send your work to a traditional journal where there's no fee for publishing, but the reader, the person at the other end who's going to use the work, has to pick up the cost through their institution, through their library, or personally, or you can pay as an author to have your work appear fully open access. This is because academic publishers are commercial operations, money must be made, and so lots of authors ask the question, is this a fair system? In terms of how much money you might end up having to pay to publish your work in an open access journal, you're asking yourself, what's the cost? Make sure to check your target journal before submission so there's no surprises once your paper gets accepted. You don't get landed with a hefty bill once the article gets accepted, because costs can range from just a few $100s to a few $1,000s in some of the highest fee charging open access journals like Frontiers journals, for example. And publishers often tend to think that medical researchers are able to pay more. So be aware of that when choosing an open access journal for your next article. So let's talk about why this is the case. Why are some journals charging APCs, article processing charges, at all? The simple reason for this has been the rise of open access publishing. Open access literature is digital, online, free of charge, and free from most copyright and licensing restrictions. And by open access, we mean freely available once peer-reviewed and published on the internet to anyone. So most authors fully support this idea that once their work is peer-reviewed and published, anyone can get access to it. So open access literature is online, digital, free of charge, and free from most copyright and licensing restrictions. And most governments, most open access initiatives are insisting nevertheless on the importance of peer review, but as I've mentioned, most authors support the idea that their work should be freely available to everybody. So you have two options if you choose open access as a journal for your next publication. You've got two choices, gold or green open access. The gold option, publishing in a fully open journal, fully open access journal, and no problems for anyone to have access to that content. So fully open access journals, there are many, many of them. We have provided training in journal choice, journal selection, but things like Biomed Central, the Public Library of Science, the Frontiers families are gold open access journals. Alternatively, many traditional journals, think Science, Nature, journals that were formerly publishing free of charge to authors, but then charging subscriptions to customers, to libraries, to academics, they offer a green open access option whereby you can pay again as an author, but you then make your article in a journal that would ordinarily be a traditional publishing journal. You can also then make your article free for anyone to access. Gold then fully open to everybody, only online. Green open access, these are traditional journals that allow for a fee authors to convert their papers to open access. This has all come about because of a crisis in pricing. And as you can see here, the cost that publishers were charging to universities, to libraries, has been rising so fast that authors, universities, publishing, scholarly societies have been thinking, is there a better way? Why can't we be open in the way that we publish a lot of that content? So open access publishing, and hence article processing charges, derive from this crisis in pricing, the crisis in scholarly communications, as budgets and funding for universities, for governments has remained stable, perhaps for research, yet the cost for publishers, the cost that publishers are charging to access content has increased. And you'll be aware of movements around open access, like, for example, the European Union Plan S, whereby the government, or the funding agency, in this case the European Union, is mandating that if you get funding for your research from them, from the EU, you have to publish your work in a fully open access journal. So this is all part of the reason that these charges exist. The rise of open access publishing, brought about by this crisis in pricing, as publishers try to charge more and more and more for online peer-reviewed journal content, while universities, libraries have less and less money. So we ask ourselves the question, of course, are these charges fair? What do researchers think? And most researchers, while supporting open access as a publishing model, they feel also that most of the intellectual effort that goes into a research article comes actually from the research community. And so people ask, why should a published article be under the control of a publisher that plays a limited role in the research and actually also in the peer review and often in the editing work? So subscription-based access to research is a legacy really of print-based economics, and lots of people would argue that the open access model makes a lot more sense in our today online environment. So consequences of the open access versus traditional publishing model ongoing conflict have led to an increasing cost to journals, as library budgets, of course, have not kept up with rises in journal subscriptions. Overall consequence, selective purchasing and an inability to offer access to anything like all scholarly output at the library level. For authors, there's the charge, because under the traditional model, you give up control of your research to a publisher who then sells it back to other authors. But under an open access model, the publisher is charging for the service of publication, that article processing charge. So we have discussed the conflict, the dilemma in academic publishing, to pay or not to pay to make your article open access or not. That is the question. So since these article processing charges exist, we are aware of them and we often get charged them by journals, how can we make them smaller as authors, or indeed, how can we avoid them altogether? Now, the first way that you can manage the cost of publishing in open access journals is to subsidize that somehow. Does your library, for example, assist with costs? Does your university have funds for article processing charges? Can you make partnerships with companies? Can you check your budget, your research grant? Are these eligible costs that you could charge to your funding? And indeed, are you an early career researcher or a student? Because often the publishing companies don't charge students for publishing their articles in open access journals. Have a look at the website, write to the journal. Often they will waive their charges if you are a student, something that not a lot of people know about. Your country of origin can also be a consideration. A lot of these charges often are scaled relative to the perceived economic status of the country that you come from. So worth checking on that as well. Another way to manage these APCs is to collaborate with other researchers. Collaboration is the mother of invention, and you can spread the cost potentially across a number of different research groups. $1,000 is not so much if it's paid by 10 different research groups rather than just one research groups. And indeed, other institutions that you might work with may have partnerships already in place with publishers, so-called read and publish agreements that mean that they can publish, academics working in those institutions can publish more easily in certain journal families. And of course, collaboration can also speed up your own research, you work faster and you publish more. I don't like to recommend this one, but another way to get around article processing charges is of course to write less, save on pages, figures and graphs, because of course a cost to publish forces us to be precise. Less is more, keep it simple, and of course anyway, higher impact journals tend to publish shorter, more concise articles. So you ask yourself, do I need all those figures? Do they all need to be in color? Can some of the figures be combined together into panels of figures, as you would do if you were getting your work published in Nature? In Science, you'd be limited on the number of words and the number of figures. Also, carefully select your journal, because some of them cost more than others, even though their impact factors might not be as good. Gold open access is often more expensive, but this often doesn't correlate with impact factor. You can pay more for a publication that's got a higher article processing charge than you might pay for a publication in a journal with a higher impact factor. And this, of course, is also very subject area specific. As we've mentioned, the publishing companies think that some research areas, medical science, engineering, for example, have more money, so they make the article processing charges higher in some fields. Have a look at the directory of open access journals. Have a look at the website Think, Check, Submit. These resources can help you to make more informed decisions about which journals to select for your publications, weighing off, trading off cost versus impact factor. Finally, then, you can deal with this cost by also self-archiving your own work. This is, of course, green open access anyway. Why not use preprint servers or self-archiving platforms when you finish your next research project? Then the publishers will come to you to have a look at your research. You'll get credit, trackability, feedback and visibility by doing this, and we are presenting training courses in these areas: how to maximize the impact of your research, how to use preprint servers, how to speed up your route to publication. Thank you for listening. This has been a Top Edit special training presentation on the subject of article processing charges. We have talked about what they are, why journals charge these fees, and some tips, some tricks that you can have a think about in order to avoid or make smaller these article processing charges for publication in open access journals. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Gareth Dyke. This is a Top Edit presentation.